It's been a while since I did one of these episodes, huh? Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unit 2.0. The past 5 episodes have been focused on massively reworking a single unit, but for episode 6 of the series, I wanted to try go in a slightly different direction. Instead of a full-scale rework on one single character, I instead wanted to share some takes on mini buffs for 3, because there's a lot of characters out there who don't need major changes to their kits. The recent Hexerei buffs for some of our Mondstadt characters gave me the idea of trying out the whole faction mechanic stuff, but I want to hold off on some earlier regions like Liyue or Inazuma. I have a feeling those characters are more likely to get buffs in the future. I'm still thinking about buff ideas for Sumeru, but then I got to thinking about Fontaine. A lot of these characters are actually perfect for my mini buff take, because many of them are still very strong in the meta to this day. Fontaine also has a unique regional mechanic with the Arkhe alignment, which was a perfect foundation for my take on that two-person mechanic. I may or may not do future Fontaine videos in the future, but for this test run on the rework idea, I will be covering our favorite Hearth trio of Lyney, Freminet, and finally, Lynette. This video is actually going to be more of a Lynette video, but the other two brothers have pretty trivial changes, so I figured I'd just squeeze them in here. Before we begin, I have additional disclaimers and info down below. Captions are also available if you need them, and without further ado, let's get started. For my idea of a Fontaine faction or regional mechanic, I wanted to take a step away from what the other iterations were. For the Moonsign and Hexerei stuff, the only condition was having 2 members in the same party. My take on a Fontaine version is to rework the regional mechanic, which was the Arkhe alignment. As of right now, characters only do a mundane instance of Pneuma or Uja damage. Its only use in combat is to disrupt certain enemies, such as the Clockwork Mechas or the Breacher Primuses. And that got me thinking, what if the Arkhe mechanic was used as a way to enable Fontainian buffs? If a Pneuma or Uja attack hits an enemy, what if it now left a lingering aura? From there, a second Fontainian unit can deal a hit of the opposing Arkhe alignment to create what is called an annihilation reaction. Triggering an annihilation reaction triggers temporary buffs to all Fontainian characters in the party, and yes, all members. So let's say I'm running like a burn melt team with Lyney, Emily, and Escoffier. Emily starts and does a Pneuma attack, and Escoffier triggers the reaction with her Uja hit. Both get the buff, but even if Lyney doesn't contribute to the reaction, he'll also still get the Arkhe buffs. It basically allows you to run triple or even mono Fontainian teams without worrying about who triggers what reaction and who gets what buff. But there's also the flip side to this mechanic, which is solo Fontainian teams. Against the Clockwork Mechas or the Breacher Primuses, doing the usual Arkhe stuff can trigger the buffs without the need for a second unit. Alternatively, the Nordstenkreuz sword you get from the World Quest can also be used to enable the Arkhe buffs in solo Fontaine teams. So it's one of those mechanics that has a few extra steps involved, but you also have some workarounds so that not every team requires the duo core. Some of the Fontainian characters have more or less synergies with the Arkhe stuff, so this is kind of a work in progress. And to remind you, the Arkhe mechanics are separated from the buffs themselves. So, for the series, if you prefer that the characters just get unconditional buffs, you can headcanon that the Arkhe stuff isn't included at all. But let's move into the actual buffs now. I'm going to focus more on the utility or quality of life aspects for this video. A couple of them might get damage buffs, but I'll keep it very vague since numbers can be very subjective. I'm going to start with Lyney, because I personally think he needs the least amount of buffs. It's also his turn to make dinner tonight, so I gotta send him home so we can start cooking already. Now, as down bad as I am for Lyney, me saying he needs the least amount of buffs isn't just me being biased. In terms of damage, he's not weak by any means. Especially recently, with Durin and the Hexerei stuff, he gets a lot of new buffs. Assuming you run his best team of C6 Fischl, C6 Chevres, and Durin, you're looking at an 85% attack from Fischl and Chev combined, and then there's a 75% res shred from both Chev and Durin. And then, Chev provides another 60% pyro damage bonus at C6, and since you have 3 pyro members in the party, Lyney's own A4 gets the max 100% damage bonus. But as anyone knows, without a form of interruption resistance, he struggles a lot with getting staggered and getting his body rocked. And the only one who can do that is me. So we need to address that issue. If an Arkhe reaction gets triggered, Lyney will receive increased interruption resistance for 20 seconds, and this amount of resistance would reduce or remove the need for a shielder. It's one of those changes that's really small, but has a huge impact on his gameplay. I didn't think he needed additional damage buffs on top of the resistance, because needing less defensive utility already means putting more investment into offensive buffs, so it's more of an indirect bonus to his damage. Then, it's still balanced out by his squishier defense stats. Even if he's not getting knocked around, he still might take a lot of damage from heavier hitting enemies. You'd still be mindful of his health, and you can't just turn off your brain when you're playing him. The resistance is the only buff I think he absolutely needs. Here's a couple other buffs I considered, but I'm also pretty whatever about these. First one is a simple aim shot decrease. Instead of taking 2 seconds to charge, it could be 1.5 seconds. This allows him to get an extra charge attack in. It might also increase his rate of pyro application, which is more relevant in teams where pyro auras can get disrupted by other reactions. The other idea I had was a team bonus that allowed other characters to deal extra damage against pyro enemies. Damage characters like Emily or Duran might have been able to use this, but a lot of hyper carry Lyney teams wouldn't use it since the other 3 units are mainly supports. Looking at the Arkhe stuff, Lyney is one of those characters who has a lot of options for Uja synergies. Chevrez in Overload, Farina if you manage to pull off a forward vape comp, Escoffier in a reverse meld comp, and finally Lynette, who will have her personal boss covered in this video, so we'll revisit her later on. Anyway, that's gonna do it for Lyney's buffs. Or maybe just buff. Okay, you can go now, sweetie. Okay, I'll see you at home, okay? Love you, bye. I'm normal, I promise. Next up, let's talk about Freminet. In terms of his kit design, I just really like how he functions, so I don't have any rework level buffs for him. Just like Lyney, I have one quality of life buff in mind. Freminet's A4 passive gains a 40% damage bonus to his shattering pressure attack when he triggers Shatter, but if an Arkhe reaction is triggered, the A4 passive can also activate if he triggers Frozen or Superconduct. In terms of quality of life mechanics, I think this is one of the things that our Penguin Boy needs the most. Based on my experiences playing him, he doesn't have any major issues in terms of comfort or inconsistencies, but his damage is slightly hindered against bosses. Since bosses can't be frozen, Freminet isn't able to trigger his A4 passive with Shatter. Giving him a quality of life buff in this way would make him more consistent against bosses, but that wouldn't fix his other main issue, which is damage. Once again, I'm not going to go too in-depth with the numbers, but I do think Freminet would benefit a lot more from a damage buff. Out of all the buffs, I think what he could use the most is a multiplicative base damage bonus, similar to the one Neuvillette and Skirk have on their passives. The reason I say this is because a lot of his other passives and buffs already cover a lot of his other stats. He gets attack from his C4, damage percent from his A4, crit from his C1 and C6, physical res shred from Superconduct, and cryo res shred from Escoffier. Defense shred or defense ignore was an option, but I think base damage buffs are much more convenient for him to use. That's kinda all I have to say actually. I feel like there's more I should be adding to the section, but I've always been a strong believer that Freminet has a really well designed kit. His main issue is just that his personal damage isn't on par with other units out there. As a Numa unit, he will require an Uja character to activate the Arkhe passive. Lynette and Farina would be decent general options in many of Freminet's teams. Siegeween is kind of a cope option at base, but we can assume that her own Arkhe buffs would make her a great synergy with Freminet. Finally, Escoffier is a great choice for Fremi's cryo DPS team specifically. And that's actually going to do it for a section, so we'll wrap up with Lynette. Out of all the Hearth siblings, Lynette is definitely the one who's going to get more of a rework level ability. As of right now, she's a general burst DPS who can proc VV and Swirl. But aside from that, she's a very replaceable Animo unit. For her Arkhe buffs, here's a quick list of possible small buffs that she can get. General damage buffs are always a good thing to look at, stuff like maybe, I don't know, crit, base damage, etc. If we want to focus more on her support potential, the A1 passive could have a longer duration from 10 seconds, and maybe we can even increase the attack bonus. The burst right now lasts for 12 seconds, so maybe its duration could be increased to last in longer rotations. All of these are small and optional changes, but the big rework change I have is going to make her feel a lot more unique in the animal roster. When Lynette's burst undergoes elemental absorption with Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro, Lynette will convert her elemental type to match the element of the box. This is a mechanic that is not in Genshin, it is my own creation, but I think this idea would be really incredible for a character like this. A lot of units nowadays are getting passives that rely on elemental types to be present. Despite being an animo character, Lynette can now contribute to these passives. The idea came about more from a lore perspective. Lynette's always been a character who likes to stay in the shadows. I thought a really cool way to portray that as a game mechanic was to make it so that she hides her real elemental type, and mask it as a different type. On the topic of lore, I do think elemental masking would be a more accurate term lore-wise, cause I'm pretty sure only the big shots into that could be capable of being a different element altogether. Masking still implies the unit is animo, but to the naked eye, they're seen as a different one. For gameplay, a lot of characters, especially in the Fontaine region, utilize elemental types in their passives, so it also worked out really well for a unit like Lynette to have this bonus. Only her element gets masked, so her main source of damage is still going to be animo. Not only does it mean her animo damage builds don't get affected, it also means she can still trigger VV like normal. Lyney teams can essentially run a double Pyro team, since Lynette can mask herself as a third Pyro character. It also ties in very well with his Arkhe buffs when you play them together, as he'll have that increased interruption resistance. Let's say Nivelette is running two other elements like Electro and Geo, so you get Electro Charged and Crystallize. Lynette can still proc a Hydro Swirl to get a third stack for Nivelette, but can also mask as a Hydro unit for the HP Resonance effect. Chevre's teams get an 80% Res Shred effect, because Lynette stacks her VV with Chevy's A1 passive, and also masks as either a Pyro or Electro character. Escoffier's teams get a 95% Res Shred for the same reason, and this can also extend to Skirk's passives because Lynette is now Hydro or Cryo. Finally, she can run with Chaska as a VV support, but can also serve as your third Petch unit to maximize Chaska's shots. And for all you DPS Lynette mains out there, she still works with Farazan. Her abilities are general animo damage buffs, but nothing in her kit says anything about the person she's buffing having to be animo. Because Lynette's damage is still animo, she'll work with Farazan even if she masks to another element. A character masking their element is a type of mechanic we haven't explored at all, but for an animo character, I don't think it's too far-fetched to be a real thing. Swirl already deals Petch damage of the absorbed element, Absorption in abilities already made it so that characters can deal Petch damage alongside their animo hits, Chaska, and to a lesser extent Yehoda, are units who straight up convert their animo damage into Petch damage. So on the evolution chain, an animo unit who masks their type would be a really interesting take on the element. Based on our current roster of animo units, Lynette isn't the only one who could be buffed to use this mechanic. I think tweaks to Yehoda and Lanyan could also be possible. This isn't just based on the elemental absorption and conversion effect, it's also because they have really good uptime on their absorption abilities. I'm definitely going to play around with this idea a bit more down the line. For example, maybe a unit who has a more dedicated take on the masking mechanic. There's also a few characters who have used multiple elements in the past, so I'd like to explore alternate takes on them as well. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. The way I implemented these mini buffs were in tandem with a regional mechanic, similar to the Moonsign or Hexerei stuff we've gotten recently. And I do feel like tying buffs to a new mechanic is more realistic than just straight up directly buffing a character. And once again, if you prefer that these buffs were not tied to a regional mechanic, the Arkhe aspect is separated enough that you can easily remove that part without any problems to the buffs themselves. I'm going to explore more of these mini buff videos in the future, since a lot of characters might just need quality of life changes rather than a major overhaul. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what you liked about these ideas, what you would add or change, or any alternate ideas you might have. If you want to share more ideas with our community, consider joining my Discord server. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!